I'm so old. When I was growing up in Seattle, there were trains still running on what's now the Gilman Trail, not too far from my house, and I could hear the trains at night just about the time I was going to sleep, hear them blow their whistle. Kind of a otherworldly sound. And I'm going to just turn it over to Dick and tell us about
Trains.
romance of railroads.
Thank you, Karen. As you'll discover, I am slightly a rail fan. By the way, just the picture that was part of the advertise or flyer leading in is of me back in 2019 standing next to the largest steam engine in the world, Union Pacific 4014. It was there in Logan, Utah as part of the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony, which I was fortunate to be able to attend. That engine was ready to roll the next day, and I heard all sorts of stories about it going up and down. I think it was I-80 with the traffic jams, because even though you had 3 lanes, everybody was pulling over to watch it. It is a sight, believe me. The engine itself is only 125 feet long, 16 feet tall, and weighs a measly 1.25 million pounds. So anyway, it's a big engine, believe me. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit and briefly in words and song and maybe about film. So I have some videos that I'm going to play and some music. But the whole idea is this always going to be behind trains. By the way, just a kind of if anybody spots this right away, this lead video, that is not a U.S. steam engine. That happens to be a British steam engine. Not that I've ridden behind it, but the Brits are great with heritage railroads. And you can find a steam railroad almost anywhere on the island, including Wales and Scotland. Ireland really has lost that, but the rest of it's great. So anyway. About maybe a little bit, and I'll begin with it. Ever since the rails first were laid, and the first steam engine, the first railroad engine actually operated here in the U.S. in about 1827. Railroads have tied together, they've made America, because they've tied together everybody, not only passengers, but goods and services. So there were very few people that weren't directly or even indirectly affected by railroads. And as Karen said, many people grew up hearing the engine that are actually on the railroads. My start was my grandfather, who worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. He lived about 100 yards off the main freight line going up and down the Susquehanna River. I could hear those trains coming either direction because of the valley, and I would go out to the front porch and watch them go by. And I think I can remember back then, I was 5 years old. By the time I got to 8, I realized that those trains had boxcars on them, particularly, that had logos that represented different railroads of the United States, probably 40 or 50 at the time. And I would then keep track of how many of each railroad went by. So I got to know my rail lines the same way. And nowadays, unfortunately, there are only 5 lines left. That's a different talk. What I want to say, though, is that what I'm going to try, as I said, I'm going to try to do a few things here, but let me get the intro started. I'll cut it down here. There. Period of steam engine in full operation. And that's true in the U.S. as well as elsewhere. This engine is one I'm very familiar with because I was a docent at the Rail Center down in Portland, and I have worked around, ridden on this steam engine. It's now the second largest operating steam engine in the U.S. It originally ran the Empire Builder, which many of you may be familiar with that train, and Amtrak still has it. But it ran the section from Spokane to Portland and back. It's engine number 700. We go by engine numbers. This is an example of probably what became the most popular engine in the U.S., steam engine that is, for a whole host of reasons I won't go into it here. But anyway, it is called a northern type engine, just for those that know about railroads. And I was down there Thursday, saw it. Okay, rail had 3 or 4 kinds of motive power. The original was steam. It was probably discontinued or put out to pasture by about 1959. Actually, passenger service by 1952 was being done everywhere by a diesel, such as the Rio Grande one up there. And many of you may have ridden a passenger train, one of the named trains, depending where you live, upheld by diesel. I grew up in East Orange, and I was deprived of steam because all we had was electric rail, electrified rail. And the bottom left picture is the Pennsylvania Railroad, electrified division that ran from New Haven all the way down to Washington, D.C. and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That, I think, the engine, I think, is the most, to me, the most beautiful engine in the world. It's huge. It's called a GG1. The bottom right picture is a commuter train on the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, nicknamed Delay, Linger, and Wait, by the way. My father took a train like that for 30 years to New York City, and then went to Hoboken, and then a ferry across. I was talking to someone about the ferries. I think they were on the Erie Railroad. I rode that train many times. They've been replaced by very nice trains now. Okay. So let me get this one started. I don't think you picked up the video on it. Anyway, I was going to play the song Working on the Railroad. All of you are familiar with that. I hope are familiar with that song. I'm not going to try to sing it. But it was written, there we go. I had to use what I said.
I'm working on the railroad all the live long day. I'm working on the railroad just pass the time away. Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up so early in the morn. Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Dinah, blow your horn. Dinah, blow your horn. Dinah, blow your horn.
I'm going to cut it there for a very good reason. This song was written in the 1880s, and there are at least 3 other verses. Now you say, wait a minute, there's a second verse. Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. That was added in the 1890s. The original song had 3 other verses with the same tune. And by the way, that Someone in the Kitchen is a very old song called Old Joe, written in 1809. And we know it to the tune of Good Night Ladies. So if you try to sing that along with Someone in the Kitchen, you'll find out you're right on the button there. The music exactly comes, I'll play a little bit of it, hopefully you'll hear it, from a Von Suppe. Many people may know who Von Suppe is, or at least from his music. The poet and peasant overture. He wrote a lot of overtures that are very used often. It's a cello solo. I'm going to try to play it. You'll have to listen. Dinah itself was just a common name for a black slave woman. So they put a little side note there. Now let's find the piece here. There we go. Listen carefully. Come here. Look like pretty good. Anyway, as you hear, that melody is really old. And in fact, the trouble is, after I found this out, I can't hear Poet Peasant. I happen to have used it, like the overture. But I can't use it now without hearing that cello solo right at the beginning of it. And every time you hear the music, you probably say, oh yeah, there's the cello. And for many of you, you might not recognize it. I did it after playing John Denver's version. But it's like anything out, you know somebody who you see in uniform and don't recognize because the uniform is different than the person. And it's the same is true here. You don't recognize the cello solo because it's not in the dress, I should say, of the piece itself. Okay, some poems, and then I'm going to, this is an overview, so I just touch on things. This is a poem written by Emily Dickinson in 1862. And people say, I would say, people who are historians or English people, English major, English professors, whatever, say that this is a poem about life. And you can read it through, and it's about a railroad, but I can see there what she was talking about. The next poem is by a Mrs. John Lloyd. Now, you probably never heard of her because she didn't write a lot of poetry. And by the way, she took her husband's name, or kept her husband's name as the author of poems. She did do a lot of poems that are just not published. This poem, by and large, talks about being able to hear the train and the train whistle wherever you are. And it makes allusion to all sorts of things, including the Sioux Indians, who were most affected by the railroads, and even the coyotes. But the end of the poem talks about its call for Abraham Lincoln to have Union volunteers for the Civil War. And they still hear the sound of the whistle. Unfortunately, they're no longer with us. So that was her poem, or her take on railroads. A poem that I learned in high school, and I actually had a chance to meet in person Carl Sandburg. Briefly, just the two characters. Huntington is part of the Big Four, San Francisco Big Four. Collis Huntington, Mark Hopkins, Leland Stanford, and get the name. Anyway, I forget all these Big Four, who were responsible for starting the Central Pacific Railroad, which was the western half of the Transcontinental Railroad. Literally, it's just a name for a common rail laborer. And all I want to notice that they both sleep in the same size house. Okay. For those who are familiar with some of T.S. Eliot's work called Opossum's Book of Cats, this is a piece, which you'll hear a little bit, I'll have to cut it off because it's too long, about the railway cat. And anybody saw the musical, which I've seen many times, Cats? I love the music from it. This is set all of Opossum's book to music, lyrics, with one exception. The most well-known piece from Cats is Memories. And it was written for cats. It does not come from T.S. Eliot. So let's see if I can get this one to play here. Chris says he loves it, so we'll see what happens. Whoops, I wanted to make it more. Come on. Get your finger off that. Ah, come on, Richard. Don't touch it.
11:42 with the signal overdue, and the passengers all frantic to unman. That's when I would appear and I'd saunter to the rear. I've been busy in the luggage van.
I'm sorry, and we don't have enough time to play the whole thing, I love it. Okay, I think we all grew up, I hope we all grew up with a little story written by a guy named, I want to say Walter, but it's not. It's his Waddy Piper, and this is a 1930s story, bedtime story. It's about a little engine that can't haul a big freight up a hill. There's a lot of metaphors in this one. But he can't find a big engine to help him. They're too tired. So a little engine comes along and says, hey, I think I can help you. So the two of them get the freight train up and over the hill. But the interesting thing is how he mimics the train going up the hill and then afterwards. And it starts, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, until he gets over the hill. And he says, I thought I could, I thought I could, I thought I could. So it mimics that engine sound, and I'm sure I grew up with that story too. Okay. Some books about railroads, and there are hundreds. I think they fill our bookshelves here. I've read most these that I'm looking at here, but there are interesting books. The Empire Builder, James Hill, is so important to Seattle because he's the one that brought the Great Northern here. It's a fascinating story about a man growing up in Ontario who wanted to build a rail west and did so, and fairly honestly too. If we ever talk about the Transcontinental Railroad, we talk about some dishonesty. The Northern Pacific was done to provide another service, this time from the Chicago area, and finally from Chicago to Milwaukee Road. Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, also nicknamed the Santa Fe and now part of Burlington Northern Santa Fe, was probably the largest operating railroad from Chicago to Los Angeles, with little branches all throughout the Southwest. I include Southern Railway System only because that railway, one, turned out to be an innovator, and number two, had a president who thumbed his nose at the Interstate Commerce Commission. And anybody reads your history know that the Interstate Commerce Commission's job was to say how much you could charge from here to there and what you could carry. And I got familiar because my father's job in Washington, D.C., and I had to research stuff for him. So I'll be facetious, but it told a trucking company if you wanted to haul rods from Sandusky, Ohio to Covington, Kentucky, this is where the route you had to take and how much you had to charge. And that was true about the ICC, and they did all of that until it was finally disbanded in the Staggers Act. The Lackawanna story is my railroad, and it really tells, though, an important story about how the suburbs of New Jersey got started. Before the Lackawanna came along, there was only Newark, New Jersey, which was the biggest city. It allowed places like where I lived, East Orange, in fact, the first bedroom community, all the way out along the line, and some people probably are familiar with some of them, South Orange, Maplewood, and out to, and I don't remember who it is, but lived up in Montclair, and that was part of that whole extension of the Lackawanna. I point out this book because it's probably the single best book about the Transcontinental Railroad, and I like Stephen Ambrose anyway. It's called Nothing Like It in the World, and it's a story of both, construction both from the east and from the west. The west was Central Pacific, and that's where the Chinese were brought in. The east from Omaha and the Irish laborers, and the east story of Durant, who was the president, and his little gimmicks would make our president's gimmicks look tame. Financial, that is. I'm serious. Okay, so I've talked about, beginning of it, we have railroads and music. A lot of the interesting thing about rail music, and a lot of the music comes out of either the south, the mountains, or the southwest. And in this case, it's Elizabeth Cotton singing a song which we're probably familiar with. It's called Freight Train, if I can find it. Come on. There we go.
When I die, Lord,
That's the last
bury
one.
me deep, way down on old Chestnut Street, so I can hear old number 9 as she comes rolling by.
So anyway, I'm sorry I didn't get the beginning part. I just found out today I could use this thing right. Okay, here's the Rock Island Line. And again, maybe there's a tune here that people have heard. The Weavers, if you're familiar with that group, and I'm sure most of us are, made this song familiar. It's called Rock Island Line. Rock Island Line was an important central U.S. line from Chicago all the way out to Denver, and it then had connection, and the bottom is left of the picture, I don't have a pointer, with the Southern Pacific, and was able to provide direct service from Chicago to Los Angeles and San Francisco. So, get there, and hopefully get this one.
On the Rock Island Line, it is a mighty good road. On the Rock Island Line, it is the road to ride. The Rock Island Line, it is a mighty good road. But if you want to ride, you got to ride it like you find it. Get your ticket at the station for the Rock Island Line.
I may be right and I may be wrong.
I know you're gonna miss me when I'm gone.
Oh, well, the Rock Island Line, it is a mighty good road. The Rock Island Line, it is the road to ride. The Rock Island Line, it is a mighty good road. But if you want to ride, you got to ride it like you find it. Get your ticket at the station for the Rock Island Line.
A, B, C, double X, Y, Z.
The cat's in the corner, but he can't dig me up.
Sorry, I just had to cut them out. Again, I was fortunate in my life to be able to see the Weavers in person. Even though I went to a small university in Boston, we got some of these groups come through, and the Weavers were one of them. Kingston Trio, the Limelighters, I can't remember, Platters. So we had a bunch of these groups come, and it was not a big university, but we were able to do it. So anyway, that's, what did I do here? I went to end. Okay, let's try again. Okay, on the this is Henry Mancini's take of another popular song called
Do you hear that whistle down the line? I figure that it's engine number 49. She's the only one that'll sound that way on the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe.
I love the pictures.
See the old smoke rising.
I love the pictures. Gotta take you back, right? It doesn't exist nowadays. Okay, let's see if I can get wood. There we go. Another famous song. City of New Orleans ran from Chicago to
Riding on the city of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday morning rail. 15 cars and 15 restless riders, 3 conductors, 25 sacks of mail. All along the southbound Odyssey, the train pulls out at Kankakee and rolls along past houses, farms, and fields, passing trains that have no name, freight yards full of old black men, and the graveyards of the rusted automobiles. Good morning, America, how are you? Say, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done.
By the way, Arlo is the son of the famous Woody Guthrie, who penned so many songs about the Columbia in particular. Well, what would be a railroad without its wrecks? And there are plenty of them. But I'll just say some famous ones and a little bit about them. This was the Flying Virginia, which is CNO, Chesapeake and Ohio, famous crack passenger train. It was moving at speeds outside of, I forget the name, I got it in my notes, like I said, in West Virginia, ran into a landslide. That's the result. Fortunately, I think only the engineer was killed in this one. And in fact, I know the engineer was killed because the boiler exploded. Those boilers, by the way, operate up to about 250 pounds pressure, which when they go means about 1,000 degrees worth of hot steam coming out. And unfortunately, the engineer survived about 5 hours. The two firemen that were on the train jumped to safety. This is old 97, and there's a ballad written on this. Again, a lot of people were killed, about 11 people were killed, and this engineer was trying to make up time. I won't go through the rest of it. Was trying to make up time because the U.S. mail penalized the railroads for every minute their mail car was late. So there was a real incentive to push it. Well, unfortunately, the engineer on old 97 was pushing about 90 miles an hour and lost his brakes coming down the hill and went off the trestle. I think there were 11 people. So that's, anyway, the ballad. I won't go through that one. You probably all have heard of Casey Jones. He was a real guy, the engineer, the picture of him. He was, again, the same problem. He was way behind schedule and decided I'll make up time. And traveling at excessive speeds, about 90 miles an hour. Unfortunately, there were 3 trains stopped on the tracks ahead of him. And he saw him coming, just sat on the whistle the whole time, the brakes and everything else, and ran into the wreck. He was the only person killed. Again, but there is a ballad of him and a song about Casey Jones, and I'm not going to go through any music, but there is music there that goes along with it, and I probably may have heard the song at other times. Okay, now we get back to film. I'll just get my notes. We know some of these pictures back, a lot of them. The General, if you've ever seen it, it's a great Buster Keaton movie. He did his own stunts, by the way, as did... the story is about the General, which the Union stole to tear up the tracks and prevent the Confederates from having trains to supply things. It's a great silent film, fun to watch. The Great Locomotive Chase is Disney's version of the same set of events, included the Texas chasing the General. North by way of Northwest, I think most of us have seen that one time or another. It's really not concentrated on trains, but the initial part of the movie starts on the 20th Century Limited out of Grand Central Station in New York. And the 20th Century Limited was New York Central's premier luxury train between New York and Chicago. The Broadway Limited was Pennsylvania Railroad's answer to the same type of train. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with Robert Redford and Paul Newman. Again, probably have seen it. Might make another great movie for a movie night. Polar Express by Tom Hanks was not a really great movie, but it did combine live action with animation. I've seen it. Finally, the classic movie and the classic story by the name's going by me. Anyway, Agatha Christie. Thank you. This is probably the best version of it. There are 4 versions. One was made for TV, by the way, which is considered excellent. But the Murder on the Orient Express with Albert Finney at the wheel. The last remake of it is not considered that great. I'm just talking about movie reviewers, not me. Okay, another piece we know about. Now we'll get into off the railroads per se and into other kinds of railroads, namely trawlers. See if I can get it to play now. Judy, back 1947. 44, I mean.
Clang, clang, clang went the trolley. Ding, ding, ding went the bell. Ding, ding, ding went my heartstrings as we started for Huntington Bell. and my high top shoes and my hair high up on my head. I went to lose a jolly hour on the trolley and lost my heart instead. With his light brown derby and his bright green tie, he was quite the handsomest of men. I started to yen, so I counted to 10, then I counted to 10 again.
Anyway, cut it off. I could have probably leave it go. I could have left some of them go because I wasn't sure of my timing. Anyway, the Kingston Trio probably has one of the most well-known songs. And again, Mary and I have seen the Kingston Trio several times. And one actually, the reincarnation, just back I think in January or something like that, down in Portland. Second time they came down to Portland, sell out the house each time. Now, I say reincarnation, they bought the name out. The fellow that is the lead on that group, now the lead guitar, was actually studied under one of the three. I don't remember which one of the three. Anyway, this is the Kingston Trio at a much younger age. Quickly, the story is, or the song is all about George O'Brien. It was his slogan or his theme song for mayoral candidate of Boston. And unfortunately, we all like the song, he lost. So, let's see if I can get it rolling here.
Well, let me tell you of the story of a man named Charlie on a tragic and fateful day. He put 10 cents in his pocket, kissed his wife and family, went to ride on the MTA. Well, did he ever return? No, he never returned, and his fate is still unlearned. He may ride forever beneath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. Charlie handed in his dime at the Kendall station, and he changed for Jamaica Plain. When he got there, the conductor told him one more nickel. Charlie couldn't get off of that train. But did he ever return? No, he never returned, and his fate is still unlearned. He may ride forever beneath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned.
I could play the rest of it. There's the rest of the verses there, but anyway, it's just a sample of a little bit of it. I love the music. That I wish I had more time to play a lot of those songs or pieces through, including the Ballad of Casey Jones. By the way, just a side note on Casey Jones. His engine that he drove was named the Cannonball. It has no relation to the Cannonball Express, which was a Wabash Railroad premier train. So the two of them are very different. We probably have heard, and I didn't put it on here, the song called Wabash Cannonball. And the other song I didn't play, again, I could have had, it was, and you again may be familiar with, called the Orange Blossom Special. And it is a very familiar fiddle song. Again, it's something, if you get a chance to look up on YouTube, you can find a version of the Orange Blossom Special. Anyway, that's all I want to say. I wish I had more time to go on this, but then I run late on the day. So anyway, thank you.
Dick, that was really fun. I think you got us all feeling nostalgic for those songs.
I can do it again, no.
My grandfather and his 4 brothers were from Jackson, Tennessee, which is where Casey Jones was from. And he once met Casey Jones' widow, he said. He was born in 1911. And his father, he was named after him, was a conductor on the city of New Orleans. And many times all 5 brothers were on the same train. And I just wanted to add that. He was dead before I was born, so I did not know him personally.
I want to talk a little bit about the movie The General. I have an uncle by marriage who was co-writer and co-producer of that with Buster Keaton. I have a copy of it upstairs, and I hope to put together a program later to talk about how it was made. It was filmed in Oregon,
Oh, yeah, that's right, I forgot it was, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's nice to get all these little anecdotes, because a lot of people are very closely, as I said, closely associated with the railroads. By the way, Rosemary, just to add on Casey Jones, he was known to be reckless and had a number of reprimands from the railroad for his driving of the engines. The unfortunate thing about the day of the wreck, besides the fact he was trying to make up about 2 hours late getting the train out of, I forget where it came from. Anyway, trying the train going, but he had been assigned to another run for about 4 or 5 hours prior to it. In taking the cannonball with the passenger train, he was already very tired. And then also on top of it, trying to make up time. Would he have not run into the other trains? I don't know. But they say he died with his hand on the whistle, which is probably true.
I want to make a comment. I grew up in a folk singing family, and every one of these songs we used to sing. And I wish you had asked when you were talking about it, you had said, sing it if you want, because I couldn't stop. I mean, I was singing. Yeah. So I just wasn't hearing other voices.
We could put on a Saturday Matters and just some of the songs
Yeah.
and everybody sing along.
And the other thing is that my sister and I, when we were about 9 or 10, and we lived here in Seattle in the North End, we would go back on the Northern Pacific to Chicago to visit my grandmother. And so that was, you know, that going to sleep and hearing the woo, woo, you know, and you hear the rumbling. I mean, you just go to sleep like that with the sound of the air, you know.
But by the way, Judy, the Northern Pacific, when it was first built, was the only first one to really get to the coast, was terminated in Tacoma and then ran upwards. It was the only of the transcons terminated in Tacoma. It wasn't until they built a tunnel near Stevens Pass that they were able to get the other passenger trains through. So the Northern Pacific, yes, was running from Chicago over to Seattle. By the way, the second one, the Milwaukee Road, was the very first of the railroads going from Seattle to Chicago directly. And before that, everything changed at Seattle or St. Louis. So there was never a true transcontinental railroad. Even though we call the first railroad back in 69 a transcontinental, it was really transcontinental from Omaha, Nebraska. So you had to change in Chicago, St. Louis to get to the coast. That's the true picture.
The other thing was that many of you know that I'm a mountaineer, and we have lodges, and one of the lodges is Meany, and it's right near Stampede Pass. In order to get to Meany Lodge, we'd go in on the week for a weekend. You either went down and picked up the train and would take it to Stampede Pass exit, you know, and then we had to lug everything off the train, the food that was for the weekend. We'd have to hike it up to the lodge. The lodge still exists. And then the other way is that you just skied in 3 miles. So that was, I mean, we were very much aware of trains.
Okay, well, yeah, go ahead. I'll add something later.
I had a very early train experience. There was a train wreck in Naperville, Illinois. It must have been 1939. I was a little kid. And I did not fortunately see it. Many people were killed, like dozens. One train had stopped, and another train came behind it and did not see the signal and just smashed into the other. Anyway, we had a milkman who had gone to see the wreck. So, and what I remember as a little kid, this is a young man, is how terrified he was the next day from what he had seen, the body parts that he had seen. And it's an indistinguishable memory in my mind of what he looked like.
Well, when you have a mass of about 860,000 pounds or so, which many of those were driven by engines or from 760,000 pounds up, so depending on the engine wheel configuration, could do a lot of damage when it hits something, and I understand where you're going from. It just, and unfortunately, I have one little last thing is the caboose on the, we don't have anymore, we do rarely, and there's a reason for them now. The caboose is where all the crew, except the engineer and fireman, were, and there would be about 4 to 6 people in the caboose. Guess what was the most common target of somebody failing to stop at a signal? That is sad that was the case. The other little side note is, up until workman's comp became standard, actually the unions forced that early on, the rail unions, if you were injured on the railroad, that was your end of your life in terms of working, particularly if you lost a limb. You just couldn't work for the railroad anymore. If, unfortunately, you were killed, the railroads were generally very generous. They gave the widow $25 for the coffin. Those are facts from back then. So railroading, one last fact I had, in 1895, the Railroad Safety Act required knuckle couplers, which you stand nowadays, the ones that go like that, and air brakes. And up until that, for the 7 years from 1888 to 1895, testimony before Congress said there were more railroad workers killed and injured on the job than were working that time for the railroads. More than 100,000. So talking about coal mining as being a dangerous job, the railroads are probably the most dangerous job.
I spent quite a bit of time working on the Iron Grove Trail across Stevens Pass after the tunnel abandoned a bunch of railroads. And they go to quite an extent of interpreting the history there, including the Wellsville disaster where an avalanche swept a standing train down and killed a whole bunch of folks.
Anyway, there's lots of anecdotes that could take a whole Saturday matters on train wrecks. You don't want to have a whole day of train wrecks.
Thank you for triggering some ancient memories. I wouldn't have made it through college except for my job, my first real job as a switchman. And then because I couldn't see very well, I was demoted to mail handler. But it was all railroad connected, and thank God for those jobs.
That sounds like the post office. Anyway, anything else? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.